Hey everyone, and welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling the Texas Medicaid Waiver system. And honestly, it's a tough one. But before we jump into all that, a quick word from today's sponsor, topnaturalhealth.com. Finding quality supplements and skincare can be tough. And that's where topnaturalhealth.com comes in. They offer this curated selection of natural products, all backed by science. Head over to topnaturalhealth.com and use our special promo code for some listener-exclusive savings. Taking care of your health shouldn't have to, break the bank. All right. So back to this deep dive on the Texas Medicaid waiver system. You've been digging through a ton of research and news, and honestly what we found, it paints a pretty grim picture of a system in crisis.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating because these Medicaid waivers programs like the home and community-based services, HCS, Texas Home Living, TxHmL, and the Medically Dependent Children Program, MDCP for short, these were all started with good intentions. The idea was to give people with disabilities the power to really thrive in their communities. But it seems like somewhere along the way, the system, it's kind of lost its way.
Yeah, it's like they built this amazing ship ready to set sail and then forgot to, actually fuel it up.
Right.
And we're not talking about a little boat here. We're talking about a huge ship. Thousands of Texans rely on these waivers, don't they?
Absolutely. And to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, as of March 2024, there were over 158,000 people stuck on waitlists for these essential services. Imagine that, waiting for years, sometimes over a decade, just to get the support you need to live a life with dignity. It's heartbreaking.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I think what's so shocking is that it's not even a matter of people not qualifying or just bureaucratic red tape. It's something much bigger than that.
You're absolutely right. Research shows that a staggering 67% of those on the waitlist are ready and eligible for services the minute their turn comes. Think about what that means for the families who are stuck waiting. They're making these impossible choices every single day. They're quitting jobs to become full-time caregivers, draining their savings going into debt. All because the system that's supposed to support them is failing them.
So we've got these massive wait lists, people falling through the cracks. What's at the root of it all? From all the information we've gathered, it seems like there are some really deep cracks in the foundation of this system.
Yeah, it's a perfect storm of problems. Chronic underfunding, a severe lack of qualified caregivers, and a system that's so fragmented it's practically impossible to navigate.
Okay. Let's unpack that a bit. Starting with the workforce crisis. I mean, everyone knows that direct support providers, the people who are providing the hands-on care, are absolutely stretched thin.
And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. The wages are just abysmal. We're talking an average of $10.80 an hour in Texas. Put yourself in their shoes for a minute. Imagine the physically and emotionally demanding work they do, often for individuals with incredibly complex needs. It's no wonder we're seeing burnout, high turnover, and this constant revolving door of caregivers.
And that constant churn of caregivers, I can't imagine that's good for the people who actually rely on this care.
Exactly. Imagine needing someone to help you with the most basic things, getting dressed, eating, bathing, and then having a new person cycle through every few months, sometimes even weeks. It's disruptive, it's stressful, and it robs individuals of the chance to build any kind of meaningful relationship with their caregivers.
You're right. It's not just about convenience. It's about dignity and respect.
Absolutely. We've seen reports of caregivers working 70-hour shifts, even going days without sleep, just to meet the needs of their clients. This is a system that's on the brink of collapse.
It's heartbreaking, honestly. It's a crisis for everyone involved. And I think it's important to remember that these direct support professionals, they are the backbone of this system. They're the ones on the front lines providing essential care and support. And right now they're being asked to do the impossible with little to no support themselves.
You've hit the nail on the head. We can't expect people to dedicate their lives to this incredibly important work if they can't even make a living wage. And the consequences of that are felt by everyone, the individuals who rely on these services, their families, and the dedicated professionals who are burning out trying to hold it all together.
It's situations like these that make me really think about the importance of self-care. And speaking of self-care, that's a perfect segue to talk about our sponsor, topnaturalhealth.com. Whether you're a caregiver feeling burnt out or simply looking to prioritize your well-being, topnaturalhealth.com has something for you. From stress-relieving supplements to sleep aids to premium skincare, they've got you covered. And don't forget to use our special promo code for listener-exclusive savings. Okay, so we've talked about the huge wait list, the workforce crisis. Now let's dive into this other issue that keeps coming up, the fragmented care that families are up against. Everything we've learned about this is pretty overwhelming.
Overwhelming's one word for it. It's more like a maze than anything else. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but each piece comes from a different box. Each program within the Texas Medicaid Waiver system has its own rules, its own eligibility criteria, its own set of services. Imagine trying to navigate that as a family already facing so many other challenges. It's enough to make your head spin.
And when you're talking about people with these really complex needs, that lack of coordination, that can have really serious consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about paperwork and phone calls. It's about, real lives that are hanging in the balance.
Exactly. It can mean delays in hospital discharges because the right home care services aren't in place.
Right.
So families end up becoming case managers themselves, coordinating between doctors, therapists, social workers. It's a full-time job on top of everything else they're dealing with.
It's unimaginable. Mm-hmm. You would think that a system designed to provide care would be, better at it.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? But the sad reality is that these systemic issues, the lack of funding, the workforce shortage, the fragmented care, they all come together and they create this perfect storm where things can go very wrong.
And that brings us to, I think, another really difficult aspect of this whole crisis. We've been talking about the systemic failures, but what happens when those failures have real and devastating consequences for the very people the system's supposed to be protecting?
Yeah, it's the hardest part of this conversation for sure, but it's a reality we can't ignore. The Texas Medicaid Waiver system has seen its share of abuse, neglect, and exploitation.
The numbers are really disturbing. Since 2010, there have been nearly 80,000 allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation investigated within Texas Medicaid waiver programs. 80,000. That's it's mind-boggling.
It's staggering. And while it's true that not every allegation is substantiated, the sheer volume, I think, should be a huge wake-up call. We're talking about vulnerable individuals, many of whom can't advocate for themselves. And they are being put at risk.
And it's not hard to see how these issues are all interconnected.
Yeah.
When you have a system that's plagued by staff shortages, high turnover, a lack of proper oversight, it creates this environment where these horrific situations are just more likely to occur.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking consequence of a system that's just stretched way too thin. When you have overworked, underpaid staff, a lack of proper training and support, that the quality of care is going to suffer. And when the quality of care suffers the most vulnerable among us, they are the ones who pay the price.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So we've painted a pretty bleak picture here.
Yeah.
But I don't want to end on a note of despair.
Yeah.
Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Are there solutions out there that could actually make a difference?
There are. It's not hopeless. There are so many dedicated people and organizations out there who are fighting tirelessly for change. And they've put forward some really promising solutions.
Okay, let's hear it. What needs to happen to fix this broken system? What's the first step?
Well, it's not a simple fix, that's for sure. But it starts with addressing the root causes, right? And one of the biggest ones is, and you probably guessed it, funding. That $77 million that was allocated back in 2021, while it was a step in the right direction, it's just not enough. It's simply not enough to meet the needs of a system this large and this vital. We need a real commitment, a sustained commitment from lawmakers to adequately fund these programs. We can't just throw a little bit of money at the problem and expect it to go away.
Right. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Exactly. We need to invest in these programs the same way we invest in our future, because that's what this is really about, isn't it? It's about our collective future.
And it can't just be about throwing money at it either. We have to fix this caregiver crisis.
100%. We can't just keep asking people to dedicate themselves to this work, this essential but so undervalued work, when they can barely make ends meet. Raising the base wage for direct support professionals, getting it to at least $15 an hour. It's not just good economics, it's a moral imperative, you know?
Yeah, it's about recognizing the work, right?
Yeah.
The lives they're supporting.
Exactly. And then there's Medicaid expansion. Expanding Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act would be a game changer. It would give so many Texans, people who are just falling through the cracks right now, access to basic health care. And that would, in a roundabout way, kind of take some of the pressure off these waiver programs.
Right, because then they wouldn't be relying on these more intensive services in the first place.
Exactly.
I mean, I know that Medicaid expansion is kind of a political hot potato here in Texas, to say the least, but it seems like it would have such a ripple effect, don't you think? If you can give more people access to basic health care, you'd prevent more serious, more expensive health issues down the road.
Absolutely. It's about creating a system that actually supports people before they're in crisis mode, right? It's preventative care, community health, investing in the well-being of all Texans.
We need to connect the dots there.
Connect the dots.
So we've got increased funding, better pay for caregivers, Medicaid expansion. It feels like we're getting somewhere here. What else is on the to-do list? What are we forgetting?
Well, we can't forget about how fragmented the system is. Remember that maze we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
We've got to streamline these programs, make it easier for people to find the care they need. Families shouldn't have to go through these hoops, this bureaucratic nightmare, just to get support for their loved ones.
It should be about making the system work for the people it's meant to serve.
Exactly. 100%. It's got to be user-friendly, easy to navigate, clear information, a system that gives families more control, not one that leaves them feeling lost and overwhelmed.
So it sounds like we've got a bit of a roadmap for change, but these are all pretty big solutions, and they're going to need action from lawmakers, policymakers, the people in charge. So what can our listeners do? Where can we even start to make a difference?
It's easy to feel like these problems, these massive systemic issues are just too big to tackle.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But change always starts small, It starts with people understanding the issues, getting informed, and then using their voices.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. So talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors. Get in touch with your elected officials. Let them know this is something you care about. Support organizations that are fighting for change. And I think, most importantly, listen to the people who are directly impacted by this crisis. Listen to their stories, amplify their voices.
It's easy to forget when you're looking at statistics and, all these big picture things. But behind all that are real people, real families, real lives.
100%. This isn't about policy. It's about people. And we have to demand better for our fellow Texans.
As we're wrapping up here, I keep thinking about something you said earlier. This is about choices.
Yeah.
We can choose to look away, pretend these problems don't exist, or we can choose to pay attention, to learn, to speak up, to fight for a better future for Texans with disabilities. And I really hope our listeners will choose to fight.
I do too. Because at the end of the day, this is bigger than just fixing a system. It's about building a society where everyone, no matter their abilities, has a chance to live a life with dignity, independence, and hope. And that's something worth fighting for.
It really is. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We know it was a lot, but hopefully you found it informative, thought-provoking, maybe a little bit inspiring. Because even when things seem really tough, there's always hope.
There is.
There's always the chance for things to change. And it starts with us.
Starts with us. And, if you'll allow me, just one last thought before we go. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are the one tasked with fixing just one thing about this whole system. What would you prioritize and why? What would it really take to build a system that truly, truly puts people first, that puts the dignity, the independence, the well-being of all Texans with disabilities front and center? That's something I'll be thinking about long after we finish this conversation, and I hope you will too.
That's a powerful question to end on. And on that note, we'll say goodbye for now. But keep those conversations going. Keep asking questions. Keep pushing for change. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay hopeful.